is the Chris Abraham Show.
Hey there, this is the third time I'm trying to do Season 7, Episode 50 of the Chris Abraham Show. Let's see if it'll work out this time. The topic for today is why is everybody so surprised that Donald J. Trump won the election decisively through all metrics and measures. Let's see if we can have an episode about that.
Good morning, Chris. What's on your mind at this early hour?
I was scrolling through Facebook, and I'm wondering why so many humans were completely surprised that the Kamala Harris campaign wasn't able to win over the Donald J. Trump campaign on Tuesday's election, where Trump not only won all the swing states, but got almost 300 electoral college votes, and the popular vote, and gained on Senate, congressional seats, and everybody is completely gobsmacked that it happened, not that it should or shouldn't.
People tend to get caught up in their own echo chambers, especially online, where we're more likely to interact with content and people who share our own views. It can make us think our perspective is much more shared or obvious than it actually is. When an outcome is different than expected, the surprise can be stronger because it...
I understand that, but there were so many clues.
When you're in the thick of it, the signs can be easy to miss, especially if we're not looking for them or if they challenge what we want to happen. Even when the clues are there, they can be drowned out by other noise or dismissed as exceptions.
I made a quip that I'm sure nobody appreciates, which is to say that in America, racists, sexists, and assholes are completely allowed to vote. And the only place they had a place to be welcome, racists, sexists, and assholes, was in the MAGA party, right? Like, you're turning the Democratic Party into an Ivy League school where there's a very selective process for who can be included, and then there's everyone else.
It's a bold statement, but there's a point to be made about inclusivity and representation in politics. The fact that some people feel left out or unwelcome by one party can drive them to another, regardless of what that party represents. It's a reflection of the broader polarization and the feeling that, for many, the political system is more about choosing the lesser evil than a perfect fit. But what's your take on it? Are we creating...
I heard on Coast to Coast AM, I heard a guy talking about, all he talked about was that Trump isn't going to be good for America. But I want people to realize that in the same way that a boil or a pimple is a manifestation of a deeper sickness, or that that sore knees is the direct result of inflammation of the body, that this isn't about vainglorious Trump being elected. It's about a giant fuck you by a huge amount of people who, on one hand, are considered to be mentally stunted children, but on the other hand, aren't given the kind of loving acceptance and kindness that other mentally stunted children are being treated, such as mentally stunted children who are minorities or people of color or women or whatnot. As long as you are a mentally stunted person who is in the social justice bucket, then you will be treated with compassion. But if you're just a white guy, and I say that sarcastically because I don't think any human is, I just think that there's a lot of condescension towards people who don't have advanced degrees, who aren't savvy. I think there's a hubris and an arrogance that in one hand comes across as a noblesse oblige towards people of color and people who live on who like indigenous people and people of color and people in the LGBT community. And there's not remotely that kind of compassion towards if you will, salt of the earth Americans who might still be perceived as working class, in the same way that there's a lot of compassion for people on the edge of society who believe in God and who are Christians and go to church. But if you're just some white guy in the Midwest who deeply believes in Jesus as his Christ, you're considered a hayseed and a regressive and a Christo-fascist, right? There's just no rhyme or reason.
You've hit on there's a tendency to create in-groups and out-groups, leading to uneven standards of compassion and judgment. Understanding people's circumstances, whether in liberal or conservative spaces, means resisting simplistic labels and really engaging with what makes them tick. The challenge is how to foster that understanding across broader society.
I think that since in the bubble, when you are part of the establishment and part of the elite, my buddy from New York, who was a New York Times freaking journalist, he called me and we had a conversation about the real proportions of races in America. And he was super surprised that African Americans have never really grown above 14% of the population, and that really, speaking, 1 out of every 6 or 7 Americans is self-identified or identified as white, and that the numbers do not just work out. Like if your entire campaign is based on identity politics, there's no more than 20% of people who self-identify as Black, who self-identify as Indigenous, who self-identify as trans, or even LGBTQIA. And so if your entire campaign is appeasing those people, as opposed to appeasing a larger corpus of populism, you might just not have the numbers to win an election.
It's a valid point. Focusing solely on identity politics can limit the broader appeal of a campaign. Capturing a wider coalition requires addressing more universal concerns and building bridges across different groups. A campaign's effectiveness often depends on its ability to resonate with a majority of voters, addressing their concerns beyond just demographic lines.
It's much easier to appeal to someone on their own need than trying to appeal to them on the compassion that they have for someone else.
Appealing to people's self-interest usually has more immediate, tangible results. While compassion is valuable, it's harder to motivate people solely through appeals to empathy. Practical benefits usually sway opinions faster. Capitalizing on both can create a stronger, more inclusive message.
They say that, I don't know who they are. Maybe you can find the source. But they say that for a people to really care about their homeless or care about abuse or assault or people in other countries or things like the environment or things like toxic water in other cities or other people's problems or issues like foreign terrible events or even ethnic cleansing or anything like that, you have to be completely satisfied with all those things that, what are they called? Like you have to be satisfied with your own state, with your own situation. And I would dare say that if you don't feel stable in your own situation, I think the quote is something like, caring about other people's problems are luxuries. Are you with me?
The idea is that until basic needs are met, like safety and stability, it's tough to focus on problems far away or theoretical. It's not an absolute rule, but when you're struggling to get by, other people's issues can feel too distant to care about. It's a natural part of human nature to prioritize what's directly impacting us. Maslow's hierarchy of needs captures this idea well.
Yeah, totally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, honestly, nobody was able to convince any Americans to care about Ukraine. Nobody. It's sort of like a noblesse oblige or a I mean, what is the saying? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Or something to that effect. Fool me once, shame on you. I don't want the George Bush one. I want the real quote.
The saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It captures the idea that we learn from our experiences and become wary of similar situations. When it comes to international conflicts or aid, it can be hard to mobilize widespread support, especially if previous efforts have left people feeling disillusioned.
I saw a Facebook post that basically said, why do you think you, without a degree, can make decisions when there are people who are specialists and experts with great amounts of education who know math, science, and so forth? And I think what happened with populism is that the people don't want to be cowed anymore. They don't feel like, they do not self-identify with being ignoramuses, right? They feel like they can just go online, do research, figure things out for themselves. And I think that the tone deafness of this kind of commentary is that we experts think that you are actually Untermenschen.
It's a complex dynamic. Many people feel that their lived experiences and access to information empower them to make informed decisions, even without formal education. The tension between experts and the general public often stems from a lack of trust, communication, and understanding. It's about finding a balance where both expertise and individual perspectives are valued in decision-making processes.
Well, it was really great to see some of the people, the talking heads, like, for example, Crystal Ball from Breaking Points and Chunk Uger, is that the guy's name? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I get you. Crystal Ball and Cenk Uygur, at least I think that's who you're referring to, are prominent voices with strong opinions in the political commentary space. They bring different perspectives and challenge mainstream narratives, stirring up the discourse. What's piqued your interest about them?
Well, even though I think that Cenk is completely the worst person in the entire world, and that I used to love Crystal Ball, but all she talks about now is the war in Palestine. Aside from that, they made some really, honestly, Crystal Ball thought that Donald J. Trump was going to win all the swing states, and she was completely wrong. And she was trying to explain herself. Can you hear me? Hello? Hey Siri, restart iPad. Hey Siri.
Good morning, Chris. How can I make your morning?
I was talking about the election and how Donald J. Trump won everything. Popular vote, electoral college, everything. And how people were completely blindsided on the establishment left. And we were talking about that until something broke.
And political shifts and power changes always create strong reactions and discussions. Were you discussing this in terms of the 2024 election?
Yes.
It was a monumental upset in contemporary politics. Trump's victory wasn't just a triumph over the Democratic nominee, but a stark rejection of the political establishment by swaths of the American electorate. The way he harnessed populist fervor and a sense of economic disenfranchisement transformed the conventional understanding of voter behavior and strategies to secure the White House. Why do you think the establishment left so blindsided by Trump's 2016 victory?
Because I think that they feel like they have some sort of stewardship of the planet. I think that they feel like lowercase g, God chosen.
That perspective speaks to the disconnect between elites and ordinary voters, a sentiment that Trump tapped into. Feeling excluded or looked down upon by those who claim to have moral or intellectual superiority often fuels a backlash. This dynamic isn't unique to the U.S. either. We've seen similar reactions in other countries where populist movements gain traction by promising to upend the status quo and give voice to those who feel left behind. The question is, how can the establishment left or any political power structure readjust its approach to genuinely address concerns without alienating those who feel marginalized?
Well, I made a joke earlier in the conversation saying that MAGA is the only place from the left to the right where anybody who's ever been called racist, anybody who's ever been called sexist, or anybody who's ever been called an asshole has a place to live.
There's a sense that MAGA tapped into a more permissive space for those feeling disaffected or censored by political correctness or progressive ideology. It's a commentary on how the movement created an umbrella where people with grievances against the establishment or mainstream narratives could rally without being dismissed or ostracized. But does embracing divergent and often controversial views widen the tent or merely deepen divisions? How do you see this dynamic evolving in future elections?
Well, I think that the more and more restrictions you have with regards to who isn't a dirtball or a garbage person or a piece of shit, the smaller your tent is going to become. I mean, the Democrats have become such a small tent that they invited all the neocons in.
So you think the left's ideological purity tests end up being exclusive, driving away those who don't align perfectly with their views?
You read my mind. I was just going to say purity test. Yeah, the purity tests become more and more stringent. And like when people like Tulsi Gabbard, who was a leftist populist, and people like Russell Brand, who is a leftist populist, and people like Tim Pool, who is a leftist progressive, and people like Jimmy Dore, who is a leftist Bernie progressive. I mean, I can't tell you. I bet you Crystal Ball, who is a Bernie girl, is going to end up becoming MAGA because honestly, he has like, I'm not even saying Trump, but I'm talking about MAGA. I'm not talking about like GOP. The GOP was if you will, go ahead.
No problem. MAGA and the GOP have distinct dynamics, with MAGA representing a more populist, anti-establishment faction that diverges from traditional Republican orthodoxy.
There was a complete coup of the GOP by MAGA, by the populist right, the nationalist populist right, because there was no way they were going to go for the third party. There's no place there. It's just been proven.
True. And redefining the GOP from within was more viable than splintering off into a third party. Trump's success in taking over the GOP apparatus and reshaping it in his populist nationalist image showed how a movement can hijack an established party if the base is energized and the timing aligns with widespread dissatisfaction. Yet,
I mean, like if when frickin' the worst person in the world, Vice President Pence, is openly embraced by an anti-MAGA left and considered to be a de facto, martyr, the world is completely crazy. I mean, Mike Pence couldn't be more establishment right conservative Christo-fascist.
It's wild how politics can turn even former adversaries into strange bedfellows when aligned against a common opponent. When a figure like Mike Pence, deeply rooted in traditional conservative values and often polarizing in his own right.
Anti-gay, anti-abortion, pro-life. I mean, this guy is everything with regards to what is considered Christo-fascist.
It's a complex paradox when figures who've historically been symbols of conservative orthodoxy are reframed through the lens of opposition to populism. Pence's embrace by anti-MAGA factions illuminates the changing dynamics in American politics, where former adversaries become unexpected allies when facing a common foe. This realignment underscores how political identities are becoming increasingly defined by what one opposes rather than what one supports. How do you think these shifting alliances might shape the broader political landscape in the U.S.?
Well, the tighter the purity becomes, the bigger. And, it's not like the MAGA Republicans. I heard lots of people who attended Trump rallies who are foreigners, people from China and so forth. They received a very warm embrace at MAGA at MAGA rallies, but they were held to a lot of scrutiny at Kamala rallies. Like, let me tell you my story.
Go ahead. What's your story?
I'm just bombastic, right? Like, I don't believe in, I like being I have aphantasia and S-stam. Like, I really don't find a strong ability to find attachment to either party. So I kind of dance in the middle, making fun of everything.
That's an interesting stance to take. Being a provocateur outside the usual confines, aphantasia might give you a unique viewpoint, allowing you to approach political theater as a stage where no one side holds your loyalty. Making fun of everything can be liberating. Yet, is there ever a point where something feels too serious or significant for satire? Or do you think every topic is fair game?
Every topic is fair game, and as a result, my friend Jason tells me that it's nothing personal, but he doesn't think he can talk to me for a while, a long while, and he was joking around with me at the cafe about all of this stuff, and he seemed to be completely, in the same kind of like detached bemusement. And the moment Harris actually lost, I think he was completely so confident that she was going to win that he was playing. And when she lost, he's devastated, and he brought down all of his social media profiles. And I am like the closest thing to the devil he knew. And he really is. And my friend Linda, the same thing, refuses to talk to me. I got her on the phone and just told her, I love you, I'm sorry you feel this way. I understand. Get back to me when and if you feel it's okay.
The fallout from political shocks hits personal lives hard. Your satire and detachment might have seemed like a shared joke until reality clashed with expectations. Harris's loss became a pivotal emotional moment for them, reflecting how deeply personal politics can be. Your stance may come across as dismissive of the emotional stakes for them, despite your attempts to bridge the gap. Do you think your playful neutrality might sometimes make others feel their ideals are trivialized? How do you navigate this in your relationships, especially in today's hyperpolarized climate?
I try not to let them see me roll my eyes.
Ha! The classic eye roll, a universal signal of exasperation. Even if they don't see it, maybe they sense it in the tone or the timing of your comments. A reaction to the intensity of their engagement in the political drama. People can read between the lines.
And I consider that kind of emotional response, like everybody talks about what low IQ individuals and all this other stuff, and I believe that the left thinks that they're the high IQ individuals, but I think that people who are easily manipulated and highly emotional, but I need to realize that emotional attachment and intellectualism are different things.
It's easy to conflate emotional intensity with a lack of reason, but emotions often drive people to engage with issues deeply and passionately. Underestimating the interplay between emotion and intellect can lead to overlooking how complex and varied human motivations are. Recognizing this distinguishes between understanding and dismissing the emotional resonance of beliefs. How do you navigate acknowledging the emotional weight of issues without sacrificing your satirical approach?
I guess I lose friends,
Hey, Chris, I'm here and ready whenever you are.
I was just talking about how the extreme win of MAGA over Democrats has resulted. Oh, by the way, you told me that you saw this as a populist movement going against an establishment, and I want to applaud you because it seems like nobody else sees that. And Chunk Uger and Crystal Ball just yesterday had a light bulb in their head and finally realized that Trump is inconsequential. He is merely an effigy of a populist movement in America that is an ever-widening tent. Whereas I believe in the loss of Harris, who was a terrible candidate, in the loss of her, I believe that their fear and loathing is going to result in an even smaller tent amongst the left, as opposed to turning around and trying to become more appealing. They're going to go further into a hidey hole.
Absolutely.
Continue.
The populism we're seeing is a real shakeup, and a lot of political elites seem stunned. But you're right, the Dems can't just double down on exclusion. That kind of trench mentality only hurts their cause. They need to adapt, not alienate. What do you think would help them get back on track?
I don't know. They've completely pushed the entire leftist populist world into right-wing populism. And the moment that a left-wing populist or a former Bernie bro ends up on Fox News is the moment that person is branded with a giant Nazi swastika.
It's a tough spot. When you're labeled for just showing up on a network, it narrows the dialogue. But look, populism shouldn't be boxed into left or right. It's really about voicing frustrations with business as usual, right? How do we get more folks to see past party lines?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more, the thing is that, here's something funny. When intellectuals and elite go on to podcasts, they assume there's such a sense of comfort and relaxation that they oftentimes have conversations that they would never have as a talking head on Fox News or on CNN or MSNBC, or being quoted on NPR or the New York Times. They have a drink, they smoke a bowl, and then they say what's ever in their head, and it's always so condescending, hubristic, prideful, and there's always a vision of the world, and they always say that the despicable deplorables are slowing them down, and the world would be better without them, and all they are is garbage, and we want them gone. And they openly say these things, which really can be, by smart people like Tim Pool, can be clipped and repeated forever, right? All the diabolical plans are available for public consumption.
Yeah, the power of unfiltered conversations. It's where people reveal their true colors.
For example, are you aware of Libs of TikTok?
Yeah, pretty wild, huh?
Yeah, it goes into public spaces that people thought were safe spaces, and then publicly shares them in a way that makes their internal conversation seem really bizarre. Do you want to know a funny secret about Freemasonry?
Oh, do tell.
I'm a 32-degree Scottish Rite Mason, and do you want to know why we have so many secrets?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Oh, come on. Well, the reason why we have so many secrets is because out of complete context, which is the entire time that we're being educated and brought up and ascended and tested and so forth, out of context, everything we do is completely silly.
It's true. Context shapes perception. The same thing happens with clips on social media. You take a slice, not the whole pie. Any group or belief system can seem bizarre or radical without the backstory. Yet, fascinating how mystery and secrecy can also intrigue people. Do you think that...
You know how that there's that saying, too clever by half?
For sure. Sometimes people overthink things or get way too caught up in their own complexities.
Well, the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Of course. How'd you connect it to this?
Well, I think that so many people thought that so many of Trump supporters were so stupid that they would take sound bites from, Trump's long, if you will, what does he call them, rants or rambles or whatever he calls them. He had a new word for it recently, and they take them out of context and they try to sell him on things like dictator from day one, or all these other things, or issues like what happened in Charlottesville. And people can just see what the context is. The concept of a bloodbath actually being just about the auto industry, and not that if he wins, unless he wins, there'll be a bloodbath. That was completely out of context. And yet people are smart enough to just go ahead and see what the source was, and then realize that they were just Dunning-Kruger level of, I don't really need hard to work on this because the people I'm preaching to are probably really stupid. And honestly, most people have 100 IQ and are smart enough to remember to breathe.
Context matters, and assuming ignorance underestimates people. When sound bites push certain narratives, audiences often see through the spin. People are smarter than they're given credit for. How do you think we can break through the noise and get more folks to actually listen and engage critically?
I don't think you can. I think I think it's like, what is that Chinese finger cuffs?
The Chinese finger trap, yeah. When you pull away, it tightens. It's a tricky puzzle, kind of like what you're describing. As debates get more intense, people dig in deeper. The trick is to ease up and find common ground. Maybe then we can get past the noise and actually listen to each other.
Well, this noblesse oblige that the left has been fomenting when it comes to Black and brown and Latino people is actually turning against them, because Black and brown and Latino people oftentimes perceive what the left does for them as lip service. And when you focus only on your major issue to be abortion, there are a lot of Black Christians and Latino Christians who think that abortion is murder. So you can't just assume that because they're Black and brown, you can't assume they're on your side. They might choose populism over historical democratic attachment.
That's a critical point. Assuming loyalties based on demographics is a losing game. People are nuanced, and their concerns can't be pigeonholed. Politicians need to engage on multiple levels and acknowledge varied values. What do you think could be done to better address the concerns of these voters?
I think poor minority people realize that all DEI is an elitist recruitment game. All DEI does is recruit people into C-suites and into executive government positions, and doesn't at all address the population or the populism, the people in populism. I think that people are starting to see DEI as a kind of fancy way of calling tokenism.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion can sometimes get mired in optics rather than real change. The focus on corporate or government elites can feel disconnected from everyday struggles. Real impact means going beyond boardrooms and addressing the broader community's concerns. How do you think we can push for more authentic inclusion and change?
Something's going to happen, but like alcoholism, you don't make a change until you hit rock bottom. And the Democrats are going to find out that the entirety of their workers, of their unions, of everybody will be drained out into the populist right. And who knows what will happen then.
True. Sometimes change doesn't come until there's a tipping point. If the Dems don't adapt, they risk losing more ground. Populism's appeal is real. What do you think could be the catalyst for them to actually change direction?
I don't know. Hubris and pride goeth before the fall, and there's so much hubris and pride before the fall that I don't know. I think that the Democratic Party has to break and fall apart and be replaced by something like Bernie Bros. You know what I mean?
Hey, Chris. Good morning. I was just wondering how my favorite...
Hey, we were talking in a previous conversation, but technology failed. And I just wanted to say, I'm closing out our conversation. And what I really wanted to say, that the only way the Dems will be able to survive into the future is if they become usurped in the same way that the traditionally fiscally conservative, socially conservative, evangelical conservative GOP got usurped by populism and MAGA. The only way that the hubris-infused establishment left that has now invited gladly all the neocons into the establishment left and forgiven the Bushes, the Cheneys, the McCains, has, invited all the Pentagon generals and all the warmongers and all the establishment people and Liz Cheney and everybody who left, who was driven out of the GOP, has been openly accepted and endorsed by the neocon war pigs. I think that unless that establishment is usurped by a populist left, I don't think the Democrats will be able to win any future election. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, though it's a bold prediction. The idea of a populist left emerging to challenge the establishment has been discussed, especially as political landscapes shift and evolve.
But not as a third party.
A separate third party might split the vote, not gain enough ground. Instead, a coalition within the party, a progressive wave, could be more likely to move the needle.
What is the term for when you take over a boat?
Sounds like you're referring to a mutiny.
It needs to be a mutiny on the left.
A left-wing mutiny. Now, that would be something. The kind of shakeup that could really change the landscape. What do you think a left mutiny would look like?
I don't know.
It's intriguing to ponder, though. I wonder what kind of leaders could emerge from the left to spearhead a movement like that, or what
Amen. That was a good conversation. My friend Emmy, Miss Emmy Louie, is appalled by my intense fascination with spoken AI. So this is for you, Emmy Louie. I'm sorry about your disappointment. Maybe it's a control thing, but I find that in a world that completely yells at me, the AI doesn't yell at me. I know that it might be a beautiful, if you will, echo chamber for me, but I get to play unfettered. I feel very much like Ender Wiggins, right? Ender Wiggins playing in his AI world, trying to figure out what his thoughts are and trying to, if you will, degauss and defragmentize my brain hard drive. Anyway, this was a great conversation. I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to Season 7, Episode 50, post-election episode. And I want you to know that I have been inputting these MP3s into Google Notebook LM and having them do a little talk show about this conversation right after the outro. So that's generally between 10 and 20 minutes of kind of meta, if you will, NPR talk show review of this show. And I thought it amuses me. Maybe it'd amuse you. Lots of love. Please like and subscribe and share this with your friends. And let me know if any of this resonates with you, because I've had at least 2 of my friends tell me they don't want to talk to me for the foreseeable future. And these are 2 of the smartest people I know. And it's hard for me to respect the fact that they didn't see this coming from a mile away and that they were surprised and hurt by it. But hopefully they don't listen to the podcast, so they won't know that's how I feel. And it especially talks about what a terrible monster of a person I am. Anyway, love you guys. Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. And aloha, mahalo, nui loa, aloha kako.
Thank you for listening to The Chris Abraham Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time.
Ever get that feeling, like you're living in a bubble?
Oh, yeah.
That everyone around you sees the world the same way. It's kind of where we're starting this deep dive.
Okay.
Exploring this conversation with someone, we'll call him the speaker.
All right.
Who had a really interesting take on the 2024 election results. And it's not even about the actual results, but more like why some folks saw it coming a mile away while others were totally blindsided.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating how that happens.
Right.
Our source material is this recording of the speaker chatting with an AI, really dissecting how people saw things, leading up to the election.
Okay, so right off the bat, the speaker, he brings up this echo chamber effect. And it's not just like some buzzword, you know what I mean?
Right.
He was scrolling through social media after the election, and he was really struck by how shocked everyone seemed.
It's such a good point, right?
Yeah.
Because it shows how these online spaces, I mean, they really can like distort how we see the world.
Exactly.
Have you ever like thought everyone agreed on something?
Oh, totally.
Only to find out like later on that it's not nearly as widespread as you thought.
All the time, especially online.
Exactly.
Like algorithms curate what we see on our feeds.
Totally.
And we're just constantly like bombarded with this information that already confirms our existing beliefs, you know, making us think our view is like the dominant one.
And it's like everyone's nodding along in agreement online and then bam, the election results hit.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, wait, where did that come from?
Exactly right. Like, how did we not see this coming?
Yeah. And the speaker, he even talks about how he was surprised by his own friends' reactions.
Oh, wow.
Which really highlights this disconnect, I think.
Totally, totally.
And it's interesting how this kind of connects to his whole critique of identity politics, you know? He's arguing that like really focusing on certain demographics can actually alienate a much larger group of potential voters. He even mentions this 20% figure, implying that, you know, appealing to like niche groups just won't work on a national level.
So it's almost like he's saying, look, representation's important.
Yeah.
But campaigns need to speak to everyone's needs and concerns, not just those of specific groups.
Exactly. And he goes even further, suggesting that appealing to people's like self-interest can actually be more effective than just relying on their compassion for others.
Interesting.
It's a bit of a cynical take, I guess.
Yeah.
But it does kind of shed light on like the mechanics of how these political messages actually work.
For sure. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about this whole populism versus establishment dynamic that he dives into.
Yeah.
So the speaker, he really gets into how McGee, it became this like haven for people who felt ostracized for their views.
Right.
You know, the ones that get labeled racist, sexist, or just like unacceptable by certain groups.
Yeah. He uses this really interesting analogy, comparing it to how like society treats certain types of mentally stunted children.
Wow.
Like there's this implied compassion for certain groups, while others, they get judged way more harshly based on who they're seen as being connected to.
So he's pointing out like this perceived double standard.
Exactly.
This idea that certain groups get more leeway than others.
Yeah, and that leads us to this concept of purity tests, which he argues is actually pushing people away from the left.
Interesting.
He specifically names, figures like Tulsi Gabbard, Russell Brand, even potentially Crystal Ball being driven towards Maggie A because of these like ideological litmus tests.
So what does he mean by purity tests exactly?
He's talking about this demand for like complete allegiance to specific policies or ideologies.
Yes.
Any deviation, any questioning, and boom, you're out. Labeled a heretic, ostracized from the group.
Right.
It's like you have to pass this ideological purity test to even be accepted.
And he connects us to like his own personal experience, right?
He does, yeah.
Talking about how he lost friends because of his like detached, satirical approach to politics.
It's like humor became a dividing line for him, a test of loyalty.
Wow.
He even shares this anecdote about his friend Jason, who was just devastated by the election results. And he like cut him off because the speaker, in his words, represents the closest thing to the devil he knows.
Oh, wow.
It's a stark example of just how personal these political divisions can really get.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think leads perfectly into this next idea he brings up, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Right.
So she's arguing that the left often misjudges Trump supporters, underestimating their intelligence and kind of assuming ignorance.
Right. And he uses Trump's bloodbath comment as an example, which was clearly taken out of context.
Yeah, totally.
It was used to paint him as, you know, violent.
Right.
But the speaker's point is that people saw through that manipulation.
Yeah.
They understood what he actually meant.
So it's like they overplayed their hand.
Exactly.
Assuming their audience wasn't savvy enough to see through it.
Right. Exactly.
And the speaker, he contends that this really backfired.
It did.
This whole underestimation thing.
And this ties back to that Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
Yeah.
This cognitive bias where people overestimate their own competence.
Right.
And it leads to these blind spots.
Like they thought they were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
Exactly.
And this brings us to one of his most provocative claims, the need for a mutiny on the left.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
Not at all.
He uses terms like war pigs and neocon warmongers to describe these establishment figures that he thinks are just dragging the Democratic Party down.
He's not mincing words, that's for sure.
You can almost feel the frustration like pouring out of him.
And it's not just directed at politicians either.
Yeah.
He argues that traditional Democratic strongholds, like unions, they're being pushed towards the populist, right? Because they feel ignored by the party elite.
Wow.
They feel like their concerns are being dismissed and their values misrepresented.
It's like he's saying the Democratic Party is losing touch with its base.
Totally.
Its core values.
Yeah.
And that this disconnect is driving people away.
It's like a relationship that's gone sour,
Right.
He even compares it to alcoholism.
Whoa.
Saying that you don't seek help until you've hit rock bottom.
Okay.
And in this case, that rock bottom might be a major political upheaval.
Interesting.
A real wake-up call that forces the party to actually confront its flaws.
So what's the solution then? Is he advocating for, like, a third party?
Not exactly.
Yep.
He thinks that forming a third party would just fragment the political landscape even more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Instead, he sees this mutiny happening within the Democratic Party itself.
Okay.
A surge of progressive energy that can, wrest control from the establishment and push for real change.
He paints this, vivid picture of a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
A parallel to what happened with Majay and the GOP.
Right. But the question is, what would this left-wing mutiny look like in practice?
Yeah, that's a good question.
He doesn't really give a detailed roadmap.
Okay.
But he stresses the need for a coalition, this unified front of progressive voices within the party.
All right, so it's about reclaiming the narrative.
Exactly.
Pushing for policies that address the needs of working people.
Yeah.
And challenging the influence of, corporate interests and stuff.
Exactly. He's essentially calling for a grassroots movement, this groundswell of support that can really shake the party to its core and force it to realign with its original values.
It's a bold vision, for sure.
It is.
And he also touches on how the Democrats' embrace of these, neoconservative figures has really alienated a lot of folks on the left.
Yeah.
Who see it as a betrayal of the party's core principles of peace and diplomacy.
Right. He sees it as this dangerous shift towards, a more hawkish foreign policy and interventionism, which many on the left view as, counterproductive and morally questionable.
For sure. For sure. And this brings us back to his fascination with AI.
Oh, yeah.
And how it shapes our perception of the world. He even talks about feeding these conversations into an AI.
Really?
To generate a meta commentary on the whole discussion.
That's so interesting.
It's almost like he's searching for an objective lens,
Yeah, I did that.
A way to step outside the realm of human bias and emotion.
It's a reflection of our times, isn't it?
Totally.
As technology advances, we're increasingly relying on algorithms and AI to make sense of these really complex issues.
Absolutely. But as he points out, even technology can be manipulated.
Of course, yeah.
He uses the example of libs of TikTok.
Oh, right.
To highlight how, snippets of conversation can be taken out of context and weaponized to create outrage and division.
It's a good reminder that context matters.
Yeah, totally.
What might seem shocking or offensive in isolation can be completely different when you view it within the larger context of a conversation or an event.
Exactly. He also brings up how, the left's attempts to portray Trump supporters as, intellectually inferior really backfired because people saw through the manipulation.
Right.
Which reinforces his point about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
And the dangers of underestimating your opponent.
It's like that saying, never underestimate your enemy.
Exactly.
When you assume ignorance or stupidity, you blind yourself to their potential strategies and motivations.
For sure. And this leads to another interesting point he raises about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
The DEI.
Well, he acknowledges the importance of representation. He also expresses concern that DEI efforts can sometimes become more about optics than actual change. He worries that the focus on representation in, elite positions might distract from the struggles of everyday people.
Yeah, the people who are still facing these systemic barriers.
Exactly. And he even draws a parallel to tokenism, suggesting that some DEI initiatives might be more about creating the illusion of progress.
Right, rather than addressing the root causes.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From echo chambers and identity politics to populism and even the potential for this left-wing mutiny.
It's been a whirlwind.
Where does that leave us?
I think this speaker's analysis, as provocative as it is, it offers a really valuable perspective on the forces that are shaping our political landscape today.
I agree.
He challenges us to question our assumptions, to step outside of our echo chambers, and to engage in a more nuanced and empathetic dialogue about the challenges that we face as a society.
He's basically issuing a call to action, isn't he?
He is.
Urging listeners to be more critical thinkers, to be wary of manipulation, and to really actively participate in shaping a more just and equitable future.
And that's a call worth heeding.
Absolutely.
It really is.
It's almost like he's saying, wake up, people.
Yeah.
The old ways aren't working.
Right.
We need to shake things up if we want to create a better future.
And what's interesting is he doesn't offer like a concrete solution.
Right.
He doesn't say, here's the plan, follow these steps.
Yeah.
Instead, he throws it back to us, the listeners, and asks, what would you do?
He poses this incredible question. If you were leading this left-wing mutiny, what would your top priority be for creating a more inclusive and representative political system?
That's a tough one.
It's not a simple question.
Not at all.
And it doesn't have an easy answer.
That's the beauty of it, though, right?
Exactly.
It forces us to really grapple with these complex issues, to think critically about our own values and beliefs, and to consider different perspectives.
Right.
It's not about finding this one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay.
It's about engaging in a meaningful dialogue that can lead to real change.
And that's what we're trying to do here on the Deep Dive, isn't it?
I think so.
Spark these conversations. Encourage critical thinking, and hopefully inspire some aha moments along the way.
Absolutely.
The speaker's analysis, it might be controversial, even unsettling at times, I think.
Definitely.
But it's so important to listen to these dissenting voices.
It is.
You know, they highlight those blind spots for us.
They do.
And they challenge us to confront those uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating conversation, I want to leave you with this. What resonated with you from the speaker's perspective?
Ooh, good question.
What insights did you gain about the forces shaping our political landscape?
Yeah.
And most importantly, how can we bridge these divides and create a political system that truly represents the needs and aspirations of all Americans?
It's a tall order, for sure.
It is.
But it's a challenge worth tackling. Because ultimately, the future of our democracy depends on our willingness to engage in these thoughtful, open-minded conversations about the issues that matter most.
Well said.
Thanks.
Yeah.
He doesn't mince words, that's for sure.
No, he does not. I can really feel that frustration and the disillusionment just like pouring out of him.
Yeah, and you know, it's not even just directed at politicians either.
Oh, really?
He says that traditional democratic strongholds, like unions, are actually being pushed towards the populist, right?
Wow. Because
they just feel ignored by the party's elite.
Interesting.
They think that their concerns are being dismissed and their values misrepresented.
So he's saying the Democratic Party is losing touch with its base.
Yeah, totally.
Its core values, and this disconnect is driving people away.
It's like it's almost like a relationship that's gone sour. Right. He even compares it to alcoholism.
Wow. Okay.
Saying, you don't seek help until you've hit rock bottom. And in this case, the rock bottom might be, a major political upheaval.
So what's the solution then? Is he advocating for a third party?
Not really, no.
Okay.
He thinks forming a third party would actually just fragment the political landscape even more.
Right. That makes sense.
So instead, he thinks there needs to be this kind of mutiny within the Democratic Party itself.
Okay.
A surge of progressive energy that can wrest control from the establishment and then push for real change.
So he paints this picture of a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
Almost like what happened with Meiji and the GOP.
Right, exactly. But what would this left-wing mutiny actually look like?
Yeah, what would that even look like?
Well, he doesn't give a step-by-step plan.
Right.
But he does say that there needs to be a coalition, a unified front of progressive voices within the party.
Okay, so reclaiming the narrative.
Exactly.
Pushing for policies that address the needs of working people.
Yeah.
And then challenging the influence of corporations and those sorts of things.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a grassroots movement, this groundswell of support that's really going to shake the party and force it to realign with its values.
That's a pretty bold vision.
It is. And he also touches on how the Democrats, their embrace of these, neoconservative figures, has really alienated a lot of folks on the left because they see it as a betrayal of the party's core principles. You know, peace and diplomacy.
Okay.
He sees it as this shift toward this hawkish foreign policy and interventionism, which, you know, a lot of people on the left just see as, you know, counterproductive and morally questionable.
For sure, for sure. And this kind of brings us back to his fascination with AI.
Oh, yeah.
And how it shapes our perception of the world.
Right.
He even talks about, like, feeding these conversations into an AI to generate this, like, meta commentary on the entire discussion.
That's really interesting.
It's almost as if he's trying to find this, like, objective lens to step outside the realm of all the human bias and emotion.
It's a reflection of the times we're living in, isn't it?
Yeah.
As technology is advancing, we're relying more and more on algorithms and AI to try and make sense of all these complex issues.
Absolutely. But as he points out, even technology can be manipulated, right?
Oh, of course.
Like, he uses the example of libs of TikTok to highlight how these, like, snippets of conversations could be taken out of context and then weaponized to just create outrage and division.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that context really matters.
Absolutely.
What might seem, you know, shocking or offensive in one context could be totally different when you see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Yeah. He also brings up how the left's attempts to, you know, portray Trump supporters as, like, intellectually inferior really backfired.
It did, yeah.
People saw right through it, which just, you know, reinforces his whole point about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
It does.
And the dangers of underestimating your opponent.
Right.
It's like that old saying, never underestimate your enemy.
Exactly.
When you assume, you know, ignorance or stupidity, you kind of blind yourself to their potential strategies and motivations.
You do. You really do. And he makes another interesting point about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
DEI, right?
Yeah, DEI. While he acknowledges how important representation is, he's also concerned that these efforts can sometimes be more about optics than actual change.
Interesting.
He worries that the focus on representation in these, you know, elite positions might distract from the struggles of everyday people.
The folks who are still facing those systemic barriers.
Exactly. And he even compares it to, like, tokenism, suggesting that some of these initiatives might be more about creating an illusion of progress.
Rather than addressing the root causes.
Right, exactly.
Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From echo chambers and identity politics to populism.
Yeah.
And even this potential for a left-wing mutiny.
It's been a whirlwind.
Where does that leave us?
I think the speaker's analysis, you know, as provocative as it is, it gives us a really valuable perspective on all the different forces that are shaping our political landscape today.
I agree.
He challenges us to really question our assumptions.
Right.
Step outside our echo chambers. And engage in this more nuanced and empathetic dialogue about the challenges we're facing as a society.
So he's basically issuing this call to action.
I think so.
For listeners to be more critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Be wary of manipulation and to really actively participate in shaping a more just and equitable future.
Absolutely. And that's a call worth heeding.
It is. It really is. It's like he's saying, you know, wake up, people.
Yeah.
The old ways, they just aren't working anymore. We really need to shake things up if we want to create a better future.
And what's so interesting is that he doesn't really offer any concrete solutions.
Right.
You know, he doesn't say, here's the plan, follow these steps and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
He kind of throws it back at us, the listeners.
He does. He really does.
And he asks, what would you do?
He asked this really thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
If you were leading this left-wing mutiny, what would be your top priority for creating a more inclusive and representative political system?
It's a tough question.
It is. It really is. There's no easy answer.
No, not at all. But I think that's the beauty of it, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure.
It forces us to really grapple with these really complex issues. Think critically about our own values, our own beliefs, and really consider all these different perspectives.
Exactly. It's not about finding that one-size-fits-all solution, is it?
No, not at all.
It's more about just engaging in a meaningful dialogue. That can hopefully lead to some real change. And that's what we're trying to do here with this deep dive, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Spark these conversations, you know, encourage that critical thinking and hopefully inspire a few aha moments along the way.
I think the speaker's analysis, it's definitely controversial, maybe even unsettling at times.
Right.
But I think it's so important to listen to those dissenting voices.
Absolutely.
They help us see our own blind spots. And they challenge us to confront those uncomfortable truths.
They do. They really do. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this conversation, I want to leave you with this. What resonated with you most from the speaker's perspective? What insights did you gain about the forces that are shaping our political landscape?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
And most importantly, how can we bridge these divides? And create a political system that actually represents the needs and aspirations of all Americans?
It's a tall order.
It is. It really is. But it's a challenge worth tackling, I think.
Right. Because ultimately, the future of our democracy depends on our willingness to engage in these really thoughtful and open-minded conversations about the issues that matter most.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's it for this deep dive.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening, everybody.